Welcome back to Chaos and Caffeine, where we keep it real, keep it caffeinated, and keep the parental meltdowns to a minimum most of the time. And today we have an ADHD parenting dynamo in the house, Lauren O'Carroll of Positively Parenting. If you don't know Lauren yet, buckle up because she's about to change your life. This woman is an ADHD parent coach, educator, and all-around parenting hype queen who has made it her mission to help frazzled, overwhelmed parents go from "I am barely surviving this child" to "holy crap, I actually know what I'm doing." Lauren doesn't just talk ADHD parenting, she lives it. With certifications out the wazoo, years of experience in parenting, education, and behavior coaching, and a gift for making parents feel like they're not failing even when their kid just ate a crayon for fun, she's the real deal. She's trained in ADHD parenting, positive parenting strategies, and evidence-based behavior interventions, and she blends all of that with her own lived experience as an ADHD mom raising ADHD kids. Her approach? Empathy meets science meets let's fix this without losing our damn minds. She's out here giving parents the tools, confidence, and straight up grit they need to raise neurodivergent kids with love, patience, and way less yelling most days. So grab your noise canceling headphones and maybe a stress ball or two because we're diving into all things ADHD parenting magic with the one and only Lauren O'Carroll. Let's do this. Lauren O'Carroll, welcome to Chaos and Caffeine.
Hello, lovely to be here.
So I usually ask people what they are drinking, but you are in Europe, so I'm assuming it is not coffee or anything caffeinated.
Oh no, I mean I've already had my coffee today. I normally have two coffees because it's part of my ADHD. I need another coffee just before bed, otherwise I don't sleep. But I've actually got half a cup of lukewarm tea, quite predictably, which we're quite good at doing in England. Still caffeinated, but very traditionally English, and of course it's got milk in it,
I'll accept
which you
that
think is
answer.
disgusting, don't you?
I am super American. I do not enjoy tea. I like green tea, but it has to have lots of fruity flavors. Yeah, the flinch on your face tells me that's not your favorite.
I like peppermint and licorice. I really like as
Mm,
my sort of herbal tea of choice. But yeah, I can't stand green tea, even though I know it's really good for me.
yeah.
And fruit teas I don't like either. Yeah.
Do not let me go off track, but have you guys watched Ted Lasso over there?
Yeah.
He is an American soccer coach who comes to coach football, and the
Hmm.
whole season he's trying to adapt to tea, and he can't get with it, and I'm relatably there.
It's tea is a crap drink. I don't really like it. It's just people offer me tea and I say yes because I can't be bothered to get up and make myself a drink. And I like warm things. I like to sort of try and nurture myself, and it's cold here, so
Yeah.
that's why I say yes to tea. Coffee, on the other hand, is very nice.
Yes.
So that's a bit different.
Yeah. So I am familiar with you. I am excited to have you here. I do not often meet parents or coaches in the space who drop F-bombs, so I appreciate that, and I am familiar with you. But for our listeners, will you do a small self-introduction?
Certainly. So, yeah, I do drop the odd F-bomb. I describe myself as the least peaceful parent coach you will ever meet. So I trained as a peaceful parent coach with Dr. Laura Markham. She is a fantastic model of what a peaceful parent should be. And basically, I trained to do this because I had kids who were neurodivergent. I didn't know how best to manage their needs really, because I was doing all the things and nothing was working.
Mm.
And I read all the parenting books. I did sort of all the research you possibly could do, and it kept coming down to is peaceful parenting, gentle parenting, mindful parenting, intentional parenting, all these different labels that it's given, essentially all the same thing. Give your kids focus on connection, respect, empathy, that kind of thing. That's what works. The problem was when I got to Dr. Laura Markham's work, I realized that I was doing all the things I was supposed to do, except for the modeling part.
Mm.
Um, because I am ADHD, so I am super explosive, I am super reactive, I am super hyperactive. I have a hyperactive profile. Well, I'm a, combined profile, but I am particularly hyperactive. So when I became a parent and when I became sleep deprived and all the rest of it, all of that escalated as I kind of expected it to, but just I don't know why. I think we us ADHDers have something called I'm trying to remember the name of it, positive illusory bias or illusory bias, which basically means that we even though everything so far in our life has told us that this thing is not going to be the case, we still believe that things are going to be okay. So, even though we're late every single time getting somewhere, we still believe that we've got time to go and grab that last cup of tea before we leave the house
Yes.
because we think that it's going to be okay this time. I think it's a way that we protect ourselves from just despairing. So as a parent, I thought, do you know what? Somehow, because I don't see parents losing I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast. Am I
You
allowed to swear?
definitely are allowed.
I am, okay. So, I don't see parents losing their shit over dropping a pen on the floor, but I would, because if I'm in hyperfocus and I drop a pen, it's going to drive me mad. And so when I became a parent, I realized that actually, no, I am still ADHD. I am still very reactive. And now I've got this child who's crying all the time and needing me, and everybody needs me. And I'm suddenly expected to be this kind of gentle, nurturing person. And it was really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I just, as the months went on and I found it harder and harder, I had so many expectations on myself. I wanted to do this really well. And I thought, there's nothing out there for parents who have ADHD. There's all these books about how do you raise your child who's got ADHD. And, I went through all the different layers of kind of, okay, well, maybe my child's spirited. And then maybe she was a high needs baby. And then she was a spirited toddler. And, I found a label for everything. At the back of my mind, thinking she's probably neurodivergent because I am and it's genetic. But she was too young for a diagnosis. But there was nothing for the parents who have it, right? And I was just thinking, this is just crazy. So, long story short, I went through a period of burnout and I was like, I don't want to be doing the job I was doing. I was an operations manager in a hospital and quite a big job, managing lots of different things goings on in the hospital, in a big hospital, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do, and I wasn't able to be present for my kids who were having more and more needs and struggling with school more and more. And I still had this thing like, there's nothing there for ADHD parents. I want to fill that gap. Like, I don't understand why no one's done it. So I trained to be a parent coach, and then I trained with Dr. Sharon Salim to understand how to work with people who have ADHD. And I've done lots of further training because, as I soon discovered, ADHD never travels alone. There's normally other neurodivergent conditions in the mix. So if I'm going to help parents, I need to understand autism, I need to understand dyslexia, dysgraphia, all the rest of it. So that is kind of what I do now, is I help both parents who have ADHD and parents of children who have neurodivergent conditions. And ADHD is often the common theme, but not always.
My journey is rather backwards. I, of course, had the child, and it seemed so much harder than everyone else's journey. So, around 3, his daycare sent out a free program to all parents for a positive parent training. And I thought, literally, what do I have to lose? And luckily for me, positive parenting is the only way to parent children with ADHD. So it worked out 3 years before we had the diagnosis.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to already be in that space, beforehand. But I'm wondering, now that you have learned about ADHD and the works, how has it opened your eyes about your own diagnosis?
So I think there's a couple of things, really. I think I'm frustrated with the fact that I was diagnosed late. I was diagnosed at 21. So actually quite early for women. Women, the average age is 36. But still late. I still went through my childhood feeling like I was stupid, I was less than, I was too much, I was too this, too that, not enough of this, not enough of that. And I think that has long-term complex trauma, actually, for anyone who has that experience, because you're just constantly sort of trying to match yourself up to something that you can't quite be, and you don't quite know why. So that has been, I found my diagnosis very validating, but I think it also really annoys me. It annoys me that we don't do more for kids and that we expect so much of people who are basically doing as well as they can. Dr. Ross Green says kids do well if they can, and I completely agree with him on that. No child misbehaves because they want to misbehave. They're either having a reaction to something like a nervous system reaction, or they have an unmet need. And it's kind of like a call for getting that need met. So, yeah, I find that very frustrating. But I also think there are lots of very incredible things that I can harness as somebody with ADHD, both in my work and as a parent and as a friend and a colleague and whatever else. I think there's a lot of benefits. But I think it's very hard to do anything completely positively with ADHD unless you start to have self-compassion. And I think that's a really hard place to get to if you've got this dialogue in your head of like, I don't quite believe that it's just the ADHD. I don't quite believe that I'm not a problem. I'm not too much or too little or whatever else. That voice is very hard to quieten. And I think it's always there for us.
The listeners cannot see me, but I am aggressively nodding to a couple of things in there. When parents come to me, one of the first things I recommend is a therapist for parents and for children. And they're often taken back, but it's so that our children do not internalize that redirection so that they believe I'm not good enough or, I'll never be enough. And the other thing I am aggressively nodding towards is children do well if they can. That is so hard for people to accept. They're like, well, they're just being lazy or, he just doesn't want to do it. And I'm like, no, he literally can't do it. But if we give him some accommodations, he can work it out. I think that's really important. I love what you said.
Yeah. And I think we can teach our kids at quite an early age how to work with their brains, whether they're diagnosed or not. All kids find dopamine beneficial. So you're not going to harm a neurotypical kid by saying, okay, do you know what? Like, it's really hard for you to do your homework, or it's really hard for you to get yourself dressed in the morning. So what can you do to make yourself want to do it? Like, what dopamine hit can we apply here? Can we make it into a game? Can we have a race against the clock? Can we play your favorite song? Can we attach it to something that you enjoy doing? These are things that we can teach them so that they can be successful. And any child will benefit from that. So I don't know why, I guess it's our parenting and just generations and generations that have been passed down of this kind of very heavy expectation on kids. I was at a conference yesterday and we were talking about educational trauma and the experience of being in school as a child today. And none of it fits with the science and the biology of what we know, how we know humans learn and how we know bodies develop. And, we're getting kids to sit down and sit still and learn. And it's like probably 3% of the kids in that classroom find that a beneficial learning environment. Like the majority don't. 6-year-olds shouldn't be sitting down for more than 15 minutes, and yet they're expected to sit down for 40 minutes on a carpet.
Yeah.
It was only this morning I was saying to my child's teacher, she can't go and get the fidget from the fidget box because A, she's got ADHD and she's not going to remember, and B, she's masking. So she's not going to have the confidence to put her hand up and say, oh, can I be the child who gets a fidget, please? And interrupting your lesson. So there's so many things in place that just make it difficult, even if we're trying to make accommodations. And I can't even remember where I was going with that because my brain's gone off on a tangent.
Two things. One, parents, when I share, ADHD parenting tips on social media, I will have neurotypical parents message me and say, "Oh my gosh, this worked. Does that mean that my kid has ADHD?" And I'm like, "No, in general, we should all be positive parenting. So it probably works across all fields." But the other thing is, I am a boy mom. And I mean, even though I'm a woman with ADHD, I wonder how that is different for you and your journey having girls.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting question. I think with girls you've got more of an emotional complexity earlier. I think I have one very typical ADHD. She's not diagnosed, she's only 6, but I mean 98% sure she basically presents as I do. Um, and then I have an older child who has a diagnosis, but I also think she's PDA profile. And that makes things very complicated because she has extreme anxiety
Mm,
and that gets in the way of a lot. And I think increasingly with clients that I'm working with, for anyone who doesn't know, PDA profile is um, pervasive demand avoidance. Um, we like to think about it as like a persistent drive for autonomy. That's the kind of nicer way of talking about it. But these are kids who essentially get, or adults, who get an extreme nervous system threat response from any perceived demand. And that might even be a demand that they're putting on themselves, like to go to need the toilet or something. And increasingly, I'm seeing in my clients, kids are getting diagnosed with ADHD, and actually, there's also a PDA profile going on because it looks very different to autism, even though it's part of the autism spectrum. These kids are much more sort of socially, much more able to kind of mask and appear able to sort of meet social requirements to an extent, social expectations. They appear to have friends, and a lot of that again is a way to avoid demand
mm,
because there would be a demand if they weren't sort of fitting in. So I think often what I see in parents is this kind of lots of different things going on in the mix, especially for parents' ADHD. So for me being ADHD, I think my hyperactivity goes on to my kids and
mm.
might make them more hyper than they might otherwise be. So my kids might, it's probably a good thing I don't have boys because they'd be like running up the walls. And my 6-year-old is like constantly up, well, actually they're both constantly upside down. Um, but I think their complexities are much more sort of around social relationships, and it's hard for them to find things. I mean, I think they've now found gymnastics, which seems to be a bit of an outlet for them. But what I've noticed in a lot of boys is that if they can get into something like soccer, as you would call it can really help them to just have that energy burn off, that time outside. Like it's a very constructive way of getting outside and getting some of those needs met. Whereas with girls, from a very young age now, unfortunately, there's that move away from the physical activity. And it's kind of, even in my 8-year-old, I'm starting to see like, okay, well, we sit on the side of the football pitch. And I'm like, oh God, really?
Yeah.
Why? And they are still playing tag in the playground, luckily, most like both of my girls, but that will happen. And I think that
Yeah.
is another issue. Although with boys, I see a lot more drawing towards them the computer games earlier.
Mm,
Um, and with girls, I see a much more like drawing towards like makeup and appearance. And with a highly anxious ADHD girl, like that starts super young. Like my kids were in reception and wondering what everyone else was going to wear.
yeah.
Um, And I think the masking element's different too. So I
Yeah.
think boys can mask quite well, and that's not talked about very much. But girls mask better. So
Mm,
they can mask so well that even like educational psychologists visiting schools sometimes can't spot it. And it's only when they see the restraint collapse, when the child's left school and seen their parent, their safe person, and can like stop restraining themselves and collapse into that person, that, maybe they're kicking and screaming and shouting at you and acting completely like you're not their safe person and actually like you're the most evil, terrifying person. But we know that is a response to safety.
Yeah.
That they go, oh, right, there's a problem. And that has been the case with both my girls, as I've had to fight very hard for them to be seen as a child who needs some help, because they do not want to stand out. They do not want to get in trouble. You see them at
Yeah.
home and it's like, yeah, it's a very different child at home.
Looking for some new toys and tools that your ADHD kiddos will love? Play Therapy Supply has you covered with a great selection of toys, games, and fidgets that can be used by ADHD children, their parents, caregivers, and professionals alike. From fidget toys that help children calm down, de-stress, and focus, to social emotional learning resources to help kids understand their feelings and emotions, to games and activities designed to improve emotional regulation. Play Therapy Supply has it all. For thousands of items and fast and free shipping, visit playtherapysupply.com today. I hear that a lot. One thing that you said in there, that your girls one is turning 8 and kind of sitting on the sideline. I had a mom tell me this past week that her 4-year-old would not sit still at her sister's basketball game. And I was like, she's not supposed to sit still. She's 4. Like, that cannot be a demand, that early. Like, what are we doing here?
And what are we bringing for that child to do, right? Like a basketball, like, yeah, I wouldn't expect either of my kids to be able to sit through a basketball match, to be honest. Like, I would have to have a whole range of different things for them to play with. I would expect to like try and find somewhere with a bit of space. I think a lot of it is setting ourselves up for success. I argue with my husband about this sometimes, because I don't believe that we should expect our kids necessarily to sit still at a table when we're, out for dinner with people, or, if we've gone out for dinner and it's a short period of time, then we'll bring a card game, or we'll bring some story dice or something, or some colouring, and that can normally work. With a boy who's very hyper, that might not actually work, like it has to be something that's going to at least be a special interest or really engage them. But you wouldn't expect a baby necessarily to just sit there still. So why would you expect a toddler or a 4-year-old or even a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old? And if there's anxiety in the mix, then that's different again, like we've got to think about the sensory needs of these kids. Like, these are stimulating environments, a basketball match with lots of people there, lots of shouting, lots of cheering, a big ball being bounced around, echoing off there's a lot going on. There's probably unfamiliar smells, and that could be really overwhelming to a child. So, they might need to move, they might need to escape, they might need to distract themselves. So, yeah, I think there's a lot going on that we don't necessarily see that our kids are having to deal with.
One thing I don't want to miss out on, you brought up PDA, and I would like for you, if you can, because I don't want to forget the next part of it, to explain how PDA is different than ODD. And then if you will, you can transition that right into how is your guidelines for diagnosis different than America.
Okay. So PDA is an anxiety caused by demands. So it's an anxiety response. It's your fight, flight, or freeze response, or fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. There's so many different Fs now. But essentially, it's that nervous system response that we have no control over. Kicking in, the amygdala's pinging like alarm systems in the brain, and it's saying, we need to do something, we need to mobilize. And that will either create a fight or flight response, in which case you have a child who's swearing, shouting, screaming, fighting you, or trying to bolt. Or if it's gone past that, or if they've been unsuccessful with that over and over and over in the past, then you might get a a sort of fawn or flop response where they're basically sort of surrendering and they're shutting down emotionally. And you might see them kind of just complying, but in a way that they're kind of vacant. They're not in a place there where they can really take in any information. They're just sort of like, a shell of themselves. And unfortunately, I think that's what we see in education an awful lot. With ODD, the theory is that it's more of a kind of sort of, I really don't want to do that thing. Like, I don't want you to tell me what to do. And it feels like a kind of, I sort of sometimes see it as being related to the sort of strive for justice that people with ADHD have a lot. We have this kind of, that thing is not right, that thing is not fair. And I feel like ODD plays into that quite a lot. I haven't studied ODD in great depth. And part of the reason for that is I don't really think do I think it's a diagnosis? I struggle with the diagnosis because I honestly believe that most kids who have the right support and are talked to in a respectful way and are able to have agency over their decisions to an appropriate extent and have good boundaries, which they understand and they feel safe in and they have a sense of safety, I don't believe those ODD behaviours will present as ODD behaviours. I think this is often a classic example of kids do well when they can, what's going on, what's creating the situation in which this child can't do well. If we meet those underlying needs, I then don't really think that we'll be calling it ODD. I think we might be calling it ADHD. We might be calling it autism. We might be, finding the underlying reason, or we might find that it's PDA. But I don't know. I mean, I have spoken to an ADHDer who says that he thinks he's ODD and he just has a real, I don't like rules thing. But I think if it was a rule that he could get his head round and understand, then he'd do it. I mean, I don't like taking my shoes off in the house. My husband has a rule that we take our shoes off and we don't wear them. And sometimes I'm just like, I'm not taking my shoes off. I own this house too. Would that make me ODD? I don't think so. Makes me a bit of an idiot, maybe. Or it makes me not have the same priorities as him because I don't care that much about whether there's a few footprints on the floor, on, our hard floors. Or I check my shoes and they look clean and I can tell they're not going to make footprints. It's kind of like I'm weighing the consequences up. I'm not going to do anything that's going to actually hurt somebody. I don't know. Whereas with PDA, it's not a choice. It's a can't, not won't.
Yeah. Not to get you on your soapbox, but I would love to hear how you guys get diagnosed because I know it is completely different than how we do it over here. But I would love to hear your take on it.
So if you're an adult, currently it's an 8-year wait for an NHS diagnosis. So we have, most people in the UK don't have insurance. They don't have private healthcare. That's not the standard. Some people do with the work that they do. They might have like a company policy where they get health insurance, but most of the time, other than that, you wouldn't have it unless you have a lot of money. Most of us use the NHS. However, with ADHD, an 8-year wait is probably not going to be ideal. With kids, it's about anywhere between 2 and 5-year wait. So again, by the time someone's willing to refer them, then you're waiting. They're probably in secondary school before they're getting any proper support. So again, that's really rubbish. We do have a system in England called Right to Choose, which is it's private providers that the NHS commission to provide services. And so that is the way most people are getting diagnosis now, is they ask their GP to refer them to the service that they want to go to. But then that gets complicated, particularly with kids, because then if you want medication, these Right to Choose providers may or may not titrate you onto medication. So you then may still need to go onto an ADHD waiting list.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, it's a complete mess. I was diagnosed at 21, as I said, and I was medicated. I then had children. Well, I had IVF, so I had to come off medication. Both my kids were IVF, so I was off them for, both the pregnancies, didn't go back onto medication in between. Was breastfeeding, so again, I wasn't allowed to go on medication. Had this period of burnout and went back on medication at that point, but I couldn't get NHS medication because I was diagnosed privately and
Mm.
my GP wouldn't do shared care, even though I had had NHS provided medication for years prior. They wouldn't do it because my new GP said, no, we don't know the person who diagnosed you. And do you know who they are? And I said, I don't know. There was someone in London. I don't remember. It was like 20 years ago. And I've
Yeah.
got ADHD. Um, so I had to pay privately, and I'm paying like somewhere between 300 and 500 pounds a month at the moment for prescriptions and medication, while I'm on an NHS pathway waiting for another diagnosis. And this is
Mm.
so common. So, we're using the system. People who don't need diagnosis, it'll be the third time I get diagnosed, I definitely have ADHD. You guys don't need to diagnose me again. Just give me the medication. Again, my daughter, she's been diagnosed privately. We're both on NHS waiting lists. Um, yeah, it's a bit of a pain. And we've just had this study that came out like 6 days ago or something. A study that was done at UCL, so the University College of London, which found that ADHD women have a 7 year reduction in life, no, sorry, 9 year reduction in life expectancy, and men have a 7 year reduction in life expectancy. And that is because we're not giving people the right support in their ADHD. So it's mental health reasons, it's suicide, it's, risky behavior, all of that kind of stuff. And if we were properly treated, and that isn't necessarily medication, but that's just, having the support in place so that we're not having to mask so much, having to sort of have these shame structures and whatever in our lives, which, so many of us are familiar with, then that wouldn't be the case. And I think that's really eye-opening and really scary. But as this is a UK study, I am hopeful that it will make people sit up and listen, because so often I'm still hearing it's a trend, oh yeah, everyone's a little bit ADHD. And it's like, guys, it's not fun to have a life expectancy of like 9 years less than yours. Like, I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is exactly what my son's pediatrician said. He said, we all have a little bit of ADHD and we all have a little bit of anxiety. And I was like, I hear you. I do. But
I
also,
disagree.
yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah. But here, most of the time parents work with schools, teachers and principals and school counselors, and they get the documentation needed, and you go to the pediatrician, and it's really just a form.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, so we have to go through school too. So the school have to send it um, to CAMS, which is the Children's and Adults Mental Health Service, which is part of the NHS. Um, But then that's often a massive battle as well, because I mean, that's what I was talking about with the masking. Like, I couldn't get the school to make the referral. They were like, we don't see it. And I'm like, okay,
mm,
but you don't follow me home. But because of, the DSM-5 says we have to see it in two settings, um, and school is considered to be that other setting. It's not legally, it doesn't need to be school, but then you're kind of stuck between the rock and the hard place, because the GP say, well, if school don't see it, we can't refer you. And you're like,
mm,
okay, but I know she has it, and then you end up going private, and that costs a lot
yeah.
of money. So yeah,
Mm,
it's a broken system. And does that ever happen
yeah.
in America?
So I am limited in my knowledge of this. Basically, here, the parents fill out what they call a Vanderbilt form, and the school does the same.
Mm,
But I don't think one would
right.
disqualify the other. So it's kind of like a simple
Yeah,
verbal diagnosis, and then you can run with that.
yeah. And I think that is the better way. I guess the criticism would be, well, then, they're going to diagnose everybody. But that's the narrative that we keep hearing, isn't it? And it's, the I can't remember what the rate of diagnosis is in the States, but it's not like unlikely. It's
Yeah,
probably still underdiagnosed, isn't it?
for sure. I think the last time I checked, it's 6.9% of school age children.
Yeah. And I think in England it's like 2.5.
Mm.
But I think,
But that could be that 8 year wait
exactly,
that they have
exactly.
people on.
And the other thing that's really interesting is that in England, before they'll do a referral, they send you on a parenting course. So the sort of
Mhm.
subtext to that is, well, we think you're a bad parent, and we think that
Mm.
it's bad parenting that's the reason that your child is displaying these symptoms. So you have to do the parenting course first. And sadly for us, it's not going on a positive parenting course, it's going on a behaviorist parent course most of the time.
Mm.
So we're going back to the kind of like timeouts and sticker charts and punishments and consequences and all the stuff that we know doesn't work for any child, but particularly not an
Mm.
ADHD child. Timeouts and the 1, 2, 3 method and all of that stuff is based on studies of chimpanzees and pigeons.
Mm.
We can do brain scans now. We have
Yeah.
really thorough neuroscience, which is very, been peer reviewed. It's, completely accepted in the scientific community as,
Yeah.
what we should be doing with kids. But yeah, unfortunately, we're sending parents to have the wrong information given to them. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is trying to re-educate parents on like, your child doesn't need, you don't need to tell them off. They know what they've done is wrong. What you need to do is help them understand a different way of getting those feelings processed. And you need to understand what's
Yes.
going on behind the behavior and help with that. That's that's how we can help our kids to change behavioral patterns, not just telling them not to do it.
Yeah.
It's like telling us not to be ADHD. Just start listening. Okay. I would if I
Yeah.
could. Trust me, it'd be much more interesting at school if I could listen.
Yes.
Maybe you should be more interesting, Mr. Teacher.
Lauren, I could do this all day. I can go down every rabbit hole, but I want to be respectful of your time. But I do want you to give people the chance to know about your program, your
Mhm.
parenting membership, and how they can find you.
Sure. So, easiest way to find me is probably on Facebook. I think I'm Lauren ADHD coach. Oh God, I can't remember. Don't look for me on Facebook. That was a bad recommendation. You
That's okay. We can put it in
can
the
put it in
show
the show
notes.
notes, or on Instagram or TikTok is at Positively Parenting Together on Instagram, or at Positively Parenting Loz on TikTok. I do know those ones. And yeah, I have a membership which has like 3 different tiers. So the lowest tier is just £15 a month. In dollars, I guess that's, I don't know, around $20. I don't know how to convert it.
Yeah, probably.
But essentially, what we do with that is we have monthly group coaching. We have a Facebook community where, people ask questions and I jump in and give them suggestions and we help each other. And then we invite a guest expert in each month as well. So I've literally just come off a recording with a colleague of mine who talks about gut health. She's like a gut health researcher and scientific advisor. And so she was talking about the connection between gut health and ADHD, which was fascinating. We've got somebody next week
Mm.
talking about, she's a ADHD, a neurodivergent sleep consultant. So we're going to be talking about children's sleep and the differences in helping your like neurodivergent child to sleep as opposed to your neurotypical child, because there's a lot of differences. We have people
Yes,
talking
there
about
is.
sensory systems, all sorts. So that's my like really low cost kind of all the people that you need to see when you've got a diagnosis and you're like, now where do I go? Like we try and
Yeah.
bring them all in on that, and there's sort of a back catalogue of workshops as well. And then I have another level which includes weekly group coaching. So we jump on a Zoom each week and we like have basically they tell me whatever they're going on for them and I try and help them work it out. And I have my course on that as well. So they've got like a sort of 6 month course to work through and they get all the access to the community, the workshops, etc. And then I have my one-to-one program as well, which is the 6 month program, and I work with families one-to-one. So that's kind of your sort of fast track to really move the dial quickly. Although I do think the community element of things is really powerful, and they get access to the community as well. But yeah, it sort of just depends on where people are and yeah, how urgent things feel for them. Because often you just need to sort of shift things quickly. In which case, yeah, the one-to-one is often the better option. But yeah, it's all very exciting. And the other thing to say is I'm writing a book on parenting with ADHD. So yeah,
so needed.
Yeah, trying to answer those questions of like, how do I do this? And also, yes, it's hard. And yes, your childhood of having ADHD is going to affect your parenting, and that's okay, but let's understand it and let's know how to kind of support ourselves so that we can be the best parents that we can be, and also enjoy our lives because we're meant to do that too, and we're meant to enjoy parenting. Parenting's meant to be fun. We had kids because we wanted to connect with them and we wanted to enjoy them, not because we wanted to just get through the day. And I think we often forget that. Get through to bedtime.
Yes. I feel like for so long that's what I was doing. And now that we have put in the work, it is much more enjoyable.
Yeah. Not every day, but most
Not
days.
every day, not all day, every day, but yeah. So I want to wrap up with one last question. If you could give parents, ADHD parents, one tip to regain their sanity today, what would it be?
I think it would be to try and find something that they enjoy, something for them, and commit to sort of scheduling it in. Something that they can do frequently, like at least once a week, preferably every day, but something that actually helps their nervous system to rest, and helps them to feel like they've got some joy, they've got some energy, they've got some excitement in their lives, and something that fulfills them, because we can get so stuck on that hamster wheel of parenting and like supporting our kids with all the stuff that they're going through. It's very easy to put ourselves on the back burner and then, only fill our time with work or with, researching how can we get our child to sleep or whatever. And I promise you that stuff is easier if you have some battery charge in you. You don't start the day with your phone on 1% and expect it to last all day. So why do you start your day with your phone on 1%? Like, think about when you're going to plug yourself in, when you're going to recharge, and how you can do that. Like, what way works for you? Because it's different for all of us.
I love that. That was so good. It started out child focused and you completely brought it back around and wrapped it into self care. I love that. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. It's been a really, really enjoyable conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to connect with you, Danielle.
And there you have it, my caffeinated crew, the lovely powerhouse, Lauren O'Carroll. I know you guys are anxious to connect with her after that interview. All of her links will be in the show notes, and I will see you guys back here next week where we are covering the importance of sleep for ADHD kiddos and why melatonin is not the best solution. Until then, stay caffeinated and stay chaotic.